honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning and welcome to Manila. In our traditional Filipino greeting, I would like to say, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Welcome to the Sherpa Senior Officers Meeting of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. We thank you all for gracing this occasion, and we are delighted to welcome every delegate to our country. We extend the warmest welcome to those who have traveled from distance. It is indeed a pleasure to have you all today. We are looking forward to meet you here and share your stories with us. I am Arnold Belver from the Climate Change Commission, and I will be one of your hosts today.
Magandang umaga, Arnold. Good morning, Arnold. Welcome or mabuhay, as how we Filipinos say it. I am Pebble Sanchez, also from the Philippines Climate Change Commission, and we warmly acknowledge your presence in this three-day global meeting of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. This forum is jointly hosted by the Commission and the Department of Foreign Affairs, and this will provide a venue for us to discuss key messages of vulnerable countries for the upcoming Paris Climate Talks.
To formally start our program, may I call on the Assistant Secretary of the Climate Change Commission. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Assistant Secretary Joycelyn A. Goko.
Thank you, Pebbles and Arnold. Distinguished guests from the Climate Vulnerable Forum members and observer countries, the invited CBF experts, representative from the diplomatic community. We have representative from France Embassy, Mr. Lauren Legudec, the Deputy Head of Mission, Mr. Mathias Lenz, Charge d'Affaires of the European Union, Mr. Isa Al-Sami, charges the affairs of United Arab Emirates. Our partner from the international development agencies, we have representative from the USAID. We have Ms. Rebecca Carter, the Deputy Director of USAID OECC. We have Dr. Burnleys of the GIC, and also we have representative from the United Nations Development Program, the resident representative, and the UN resident coordinator, Mr. Ola Algren. Friends and colleagues from the government, ministries, and agencies in the Philippines, I would like to recognize Undersecretary Pama, Assistant Secretary Jesus Domingo, our ambassador from the Geneva Mission, Ambassador Rebong, also representatives from the non-government organizations, academic and research institution. Again, magandang umaga po. Good morning. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you to this Sherpa Senior Officials Meeting of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. Why a Sherpa meeting? As most of you are probably aware, the name is derived from Sherpa people, a Nepalese group who serves as guide and porters in the Himalayas. A Sherpa meeting is where possible agreements are laid out that clears the way for a major summit. In the context of this Sherpa Senior Officials Meeting of the Forum offers the prospect of making a new contribution to shaping critical climate change policy decisions, as well as articulating shared interests. It serves to set the agenda and key messages of vulnerable countries for the United Nations Climate Change Conference in Paris, the COP21. This will be embodied in an outcome document that is foreseen to be carried forward for confirmation by leaders of the CBF, planned in conjunction with the leaders' event of the COP21 in Paris later this year. And who better to outline the issues of primary interest to this group and to set the tone of this two-day meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor and privilege of introducing our keynote speaker, who principally authored and sponsored the Philippine Climate Change Act, a landmark legislation that is considered as a model for other nations. She sponsored the People's Survival Fund, an amendment of the climate change law, and co-sponsored the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act. Our keynote speaker also authored key environmental laws, such as Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, the Renewable Energy Act, and Environmental Awareness Act. Since being appointed by the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction as the Asia-Pacific Regional Champion for Disaster Risk Reduction and Climate Change Adaptation in 2008, she has actively advocated for reducing disaster risk and building resilience. She successfully brought DRR to the joint Philippine-France Manila Call to Action on Climate Change that she read on the occasion of the French President's 2015 visit to the Philippines, which states, we need an agreement that reduces emissions, create economic opportunities, and equip us to manage the associated risks that are already locked in for the foreseeable future. She also delivered the Philippine Statement and led the Philippine delegation to the third UN Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Sendai, Japan in March 2015. A 3-year term senator, our key speaker is also the only female to the senatorial election twice and the only woman to serve a majority floor leader. She currently chairs the Senate Committees on Climate Change, Finance, Cultural Communities, and leads the Philippine chapter of the Global Legislator Organization International. She's recognized as among the global leaders of tomorrow by the World Economic Forum and a hero of resilience by the United Nations. She is a member of the Global 500 Roll of Honor of the United Nations Environment Program. She's both an awardee of the 10 Outstanding Young Men and the Outstanding Women in the Nation's Service of the Philippines. A cum laude graduate of the University of the Philippines, she is also a lieutenant colonel in the Philippine Air Force Reserve. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, join me in welcoming the Honorable Senator Lauren Legarda.
Is this a microphone? Okay. Thank you very much, and good morning to all of you, especially to our foreign guests. Mabuhay, magandang umaga sa inyo. I would like to acknowledge the presence of Ambassador Cecile Rebong of the Department of Foreign Affairs. Thank you, Assistant Secretary and Acting Vice Chair of the Climate Change Commission, my favorite government agency because I gave birth to that, Joy Goko. And Assistant Secretary Gary Domingo of the Department of Foreign Affairs, and Undersecretary Alex Pama, who is in the midst of all the coordination for disaster risk reduction of the OCD, which is the Secretariat for the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Council, another law that we authored. So imagine if the Senate or Congress did not author these laws, who would be negotiating in Paris? Who would be negotiating in Bonn? Who would be hosting this conference for you? Who would be coordinating all the impacts of Yolanda and Lando and all of these agencies? So we're proud that we have actually put in place all these policies, all these commissions and councils. What we need to do is to strengthen it. I'm happy to meet the new UNDP resident coordinator, Mr. Ola Almgren. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And all our friends, I believe that everybody present here is both a climate change adaptation and mitigation advocate and a disaster risk reduction advocate, if not policymaker, if not implementer. So welcome. In fact, I shouldn't be speaking before you because you are the experts, you are the scientists, you are the technicians who should probably tell me more about the work you're doing in your respective countries, but I'm honored and humbled to be before you today. Again, Commissioner Sani Alvarez, who is one of the first in my country to be able to convey the importance of climate change when he was still in the Senate, more than 2 decades ago, and his wife, Cecile Alvarez. It is therefore with pleasure that I welcome you to the Philippines for the 3rd global meeting of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. Just an aside, in 2009, when I was on a UN mission because I worked with the UN ISDR, and we met with then President of Maldives, Nasheed, I brought up the idea, along with Jerry Velasquez of the ISDR and Manny de Guzman, who was a consultant then, that Nasheed and I set up the Climate Vulnerable Forum. I even gave President Nasheed a copy of a concept note that the UN ISDR and I, my office then, heading the Climate Change Committee, that we could probably start out between Maldives and the Philippines. I believe that I also gave a copy to then Timor-Leste President, Jose Ramos Horta, and he said, maybe between the two of us, we can have some group. I did not call it yet a forum. We call it a climate, countries which are vulnerable to climate, etc. And I'm happy to see that the concept note that we gave President Nasheed of Maldives had reached the UNDP and had eventually been formalized as the Climate Vulnerable Forum. I'm not saying I'm the author of this. All I'm saying is that call it serendipity or synchronicity, and we are here holding the 3rd global meeting of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. I believe that we are here today not to discuss the theoretical merits of doing something versus doing nothing about the climate crisis. The signs are all around us. The numbers speak for themselves. It is no longer an issue of taking action, but rather of how much action we need to take. As you all know, 3 weeks ago, Typhoon Kopu, Lando, battered provinces in Luzon, here in the Philippines, affecting more than 3 million people, causing damages to agriculture and infrastructure worth $235.8 million or 11 billion pesos. This, as several communities in the Visayas, particularly in Tacloban, have yet to fully recover 2 years after Super Typhoon Haiyan or Yolanda, which celebrated its anniversary, maybe not celebrate, which commemorated its anniversary, I correct myself, yesterday, as it wreaked havoc in the region, killing more than 7,000 individuals on November 8 of 2013. And in between that, Yolanda and Lando, we had Sendong and Pablo and Habagat and many others. And as I speak before you, we also have El Nino, as you know, which will run up to the first quarter of 2016. So clearly, we must take urgent and aggressive climate action. The Philippines and fellow member nations in the Climate Vulnerable Forum can no longer take this injustice sitting down. This gathering in Manila is historic because first, I believe that you will be signing the Manila-Paris Declaration, which articulates the common aspirations of the world's most vulnerable countries for the UN Climate Change Conference that will be convened end of this month towards the first week of December. Second, we're all here to agree and to finalize the Climate Vulnerable Forum Roadmap 2016 to 2018, which contains the medium-term climate action agenda of our vulnerable countries. I just wonder, why is it just 2 years? Perhaps you could have 2016 to 2020, because before you have a roadmap, but knowing legislation, knowing how policies are set out, before you get to actually implement it, it will be gone. So just a suggestion, 2016 to 2020 perhaps, but it's really up to you. In crafting these documents, we have to be ambitious, as you all would agree. We must no longer plead for the rest of the developed nations to commit and to act upon the decades-long stagnation to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius. Today, we demand that the world join us and do something to reach the target of 1.5 degrees Celsius to prevent any further risks to present and future generations. The average global temperature has risen by 0.8 degrees Celsius since 1880. At this level, we are already experiencing unprecedented extreme weather events, whether it's severe droughts, frequent, more intense, stronger typhoons, sea level rise, floods, landslides, etc., among many other climate change impacts. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC, has received 154, if I'm not mistaken, INDCs. But these submissions are inadequate, as the combined commitments as computed now would still lead to 2.7 degrees Celsius global warming by 2030. As you all know, perhaps, the World Bank projects that under a 2 degrees Celsius scenario, there will be a 20% decline in water availability for many regions and a 15 to 20% decrease in crop yield. So if it's with our commitments, it's 2.7, and a 2.7 would spell devastation, destruction, loss, and damage to livelihoods, and even death. We've reached almost 1%. So clearly, the INDCs must even be made more ambitious, and negotiations must be tougher. With a warming of up to 2 degrees Celsius, sea level rise is projected to be 70 centimeters. Sea level rise, floods that damage fish farms, and the increased acidification of the oceans by 2050 could reduce farmed fish yield by 90%. And if we reach a 4 degrees Celsius warming, the IPCC predicts, and I quote, severe and widespread impacts on unique and threatened systems, substantial species extinction, large risks to global and regional food security, and the combination of high temperature and humidity compromising normal human activities. That's in the words of the IPCC. So clearly we need to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius to be able to survive. We are in a position to demand, because as developing nations who are the least emitters of carbon, we bear the brunt of climate change. The Philippines is 0.002 degrees, as Joy or Red, is that accurate? But we are much less than 1%. Yet we are the third most vulnerable nation in the world, and as far back as 2009, Typhoon Ketsana Orondoy ate up 2.5% of our GDP, which could have gone to schools, to education, to teacher training, to hospitals, to healthcare, to building homes. A study by DARA, commissioned by the Climate Vulnerable Forum, entitled Climate Vulnerability Monitor, a guide to the cold calculus of a hot planet, shows that if the world goes business as usual, there will be 6 million deaths per year by 2030, close to 700,000 of which will be due to climate change. The report further states, and I quote, that a significant share of the global population would be directly affected by inaction on climate change. The global figures mask enormous costs that will, in particular, hit developing countries and above all the world's poorest groups, unquote. Least developed countries faced an average of more than 7% of foregone GDP in 2010 due to climate change and the carbon economy. Over 90% of mortality assessed in the report occurs in developing countries only, more than 98% in the case of climate change. Of all these losses, it is us, the lower and middle income countries, that are most exposed. Our losses of income are already extreme, and our development goals, particularly on poverty reduction, will be harder to achieve because of the climate crisis we are all experiencing. Within our respective economies and among us vulnerable nations, we must adapt. We must also mitigate, even if we are non-emitters. We need to strengthen the capacities of our governments and apply the whole of society approach in integrating responses to climate change within national to local policy frameworks and programs of actions. I take humble pride in the leadership of the Philippines in global climate action and advocacy. The United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, or the UNISDR, has hailed our climate resilience laws as among the world's best. And I'm referring to the NDREAMC law and the Climate Change Act. Philippine climate change law, which I authored, created the Climate Change Commission, headed by no less than the President of the Republic of the Philippines, and it mainstreams climate change adaptation in various phases of policy formulation, with a national action plan and the local action plan, which all 1,634 cities and municipalities and 82 provinces must have by now, but I admit it is not yet implemented in all local government units. Again, the original bill, which I wrote in 2007, had the funding mechanism. But as you know, those who are parliamentarians would understand that along the way, some non-believers in DRR and climate etched out the funding mechanism. And so, legislation is a child of compromise. We agreed, and there was no funding, and the People's Survival Fund had to be filed eventually after the first law was passed. But the good news is, it has been passed into law, the People's Survival Fund Act, a measure which I sponsored in the Philippine Senate, complements, which is actually a part of the original bill which I wrote in 2007. It helps by achieving its objectives through the provision of funds to local governments and people's organizations and non-government organizations and communities for their climate change adaptation programs. Again, the implementing rules and regulations, and I call on the Office of the President to sign it so that the rollout, which is done proactively by the PSF, and we have one of the members of the board here, Red Constantino, and ASEC Joy Goco was also present, can actually take into effect. Again, this PSF was newly enacted, again, because not everybody understands the importance of climate and not everybody has embraced DRR as their life work. Not many supported the fact that it should be funded. But then, because legislation is all about compromise sometimes, we agreed before that it would be in the unprogram fund. Fast forward years later, it is now in the program fund, and it is the first time that there's a female chair of the Finance Committee who understands DRR, who has embraced CCA and DRR as her life advocacy, and now we have 1 billion in program fund, perhaps even more, for the People's Survival Fund. So from 2007 to 2015, it must take so long, but that is the importance of persistence, and never think that you can't get anything done, because compromises may be made along the way, but in the end, you will get what you want as long as you know what you're doing is for the good of humanity. So this PSF supports the improvement of the monitoring, the controlling, the prevention of diseases triggered by climate change, the establishment of forecasting and early warning systems, the strengthening of institutional development for local governments, for preventive measures, planning, preparedness, the management of impacts relating to climate change. Many programs and projects for which the internal revenue allotment of local government units, for which people's organizations may have the capacity but don't have the capital, will be made available through the People's Survival Fund. Perhaps, again, our Department of Foreign Affairs, through UNIO, through Ambassador Rebong in Geneva, through our ambassador in Berlin, and in many other countries, developed nations, can perhaps tap assistance, technical and financial, for the CCCOM and for the PSF, so that we will have more funds apart from those allocated from the General Appropriations Act. Meanwhile, the Philippine National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act promotes a comprehensive national disaster risk reduction and management plan that strengthens the capacity of the national government and the local government units together with partner stakeholders to build the disaster resilience of communities. And that is the one headed by Undersecretary Pama of the OCD, present here today. Our government has also started climate tagging expenditure for climate change adaptation and mitigation, and will prioritize funding for adaptation to reduce the vulnerability and address the climate risks to our communities. The former Vice Chair, Commissioner Lucille Sering, who's running for Congress, I'm happy that I will have someone in the lower house to help me in CCA and DRR. But when she was still the Vice Chair, she told me in our hearing a few weeks ago that there was at least 142 million in the 3.002 trillion peso budget, or a certain percentage of our funds allocated to climate. I was not happy about that, and I said, perhaps, Lucille, we can increase and make sure that more of the agency's budget could be climate tagged. In fact, I was not even certain whether the 142 is that accurate. Joy is actually climate tagging because she said, in fact, there were certain templates that needed to be followed, and agencies submitted their compliance with climate tagging. So what I did, after hearing that from Secretary Sering, was to actually urge agencies to increase their adaptation and mitigation projects and programs and activities so that, in effect, the whole 3 trillion budget will be a climate budget. The whole 3 trillion budget will be DRR budget. We must integrate and mainstream so that in the construction of school buildings, geohazard maps must be used as basis. Multi-hazard risk assessments should have been conducted. There should be planning and engineering based on the strongest typhoon, Yolanda, which is 315 kilometers per hour. There should be wind velocity that should be taken into consideration. And old laws like the 1981 water catchment law should be integrated in infrastructure of government so that rainwater, which is frequent, which we have a lot of in this country, could be used for other purposes, of course, other than potable drinking water. What I'm saying is that mainstreaming of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation in our 3 trillion budget is possible when feasible, and it's actually should be prioritized. The Philippines is considered or is consistent in practicing leadership by example. In our INDC, we demonstrated that even vulnerable countries can plan, design, and implement ambitious climate adaptation and mitigation commitments. The Philippine government has also taken an active role in the CVF, initiating the establishment of the Vulnerable 20 Group of Ministers, or the V20. We've also committed to hosting the future South-South Center of Excellence on Climate Information and Services. The project, a joint undertaking of the Climate Change Commission and the PAG-ASA, which is the Weather Bureau under the Department of Science and Technology. It aims to facilitate collaboration on climate information and services by key actors in the country and globally through the Climate Vulnerable Forum, by providing a venue for knowledge exchange and learning among countries vulnerable to climate change. Also, former Secretary Sering had mentioned to me that the GIZ, Dr. Liz is present here today, thank you for that, the German government aid agency will be assisting the Philippines in terms of financial and technical assistance in setting up the first climate center in Clark Green City, and we will be having training of LGUs. I'm also instructing the local government academy of the DILG, or the local government department, so that all local governments will have knowledge and training on disaster risk reduction. In all of this, we want to tell the world that we may be vulnerable, but we are not incapable of action. We should stop acting like victims. We should be more proactive and actually tell the world that we are capable of action. In closing, I thank all the countries, agencies, individuals, and guests who have made this gathering happen. Everyone's role is important because the outcome of this meeting will be used for the CVF high level at COP21 in December. I would also like to take this opportunity to invite other vulnerable nations to join the CVF as members. And we ask the developed countries to support us and back us up. It is no longer to each his own philosophy and not only a matter of economy or policy. It is an issue of humanity and of conscience. We live in only one planet, that's for sure, and that's so simply said. And by now, climate change should make countries, developed or developing, realize that moats, gates, massive barriers, borders are ephemeral, easily destroyed, and antiquated concepts. The truth is, there are really no borders. We are all connected, and we suffer the consequences of climate change altogether. We suffer the consequences of the abuse on the environment. We suffer the consequences of apathy, of ignorance, of bureaucratic red tape. We suffer the consequences of the abuses of the developed nations who do not comply with their commitments to financial and technical assistance to developing nations. This is not the time for restraint. This is not the time to wag the finger of indictment. This is the moment for collective and urgent climate action. Thank you. Good morning to all of you.
In November 2009, the first the forum first met in Maldives, where 11 nations gathered, adopting the first declaration that expressed alarm at human-induced changes to the climate.
For this session, we would like to call in the following honorable guests to join us on stage. We'd like to invite Assistant Secretary Jesus Domingo from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Philippines, Director Shanchita Hakwe, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh, and His Excellency Javier Diaz Carmona, Ambassador of Costa Rica to Guatemala.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are pleased to share with you the history and highlights of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. We are honored to have here with us our distinguished guests to share their stories in building cooperation, knowledge, and awareness on global warming. On behalf of Maldives and Kiribati, it is my honor to introduce Assistant Secretary Jesus Domingo of the Department of Foreign Affairs, the Philippines. Sir?
Thank you, Arnold and Pebbles. Honorable Senator Legarda, Excellencies and friends from the Diplomatic Corps and the Climate Action Community, and of course, our Sherpas of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, good morning. So it's my honor to begin the sharing of the highlights of the presidencies of the CVF, beginning with Maldives. So as upon the conception of the idea of what was to be known as a CVF spearheaded by Senator Legarda, Maldives took the initiative to formally create the forum in 2009, gathering heads of state, ministers, and other high-level representatives in the attempt to ensure a more prominent voice for the most vulnerable countries from all regions and groups and a common platform just ahead of the major Copenhagen Climate Summit in COP15. The first CVF high-level global meeting gathered 11 nations, the CVF's founding members, which included African nations, least developed countries, small island developing states, and middle-income countries, a formula that the forum would expand in later years through increasingly stronger representation from such countries. The high-level meeting in Malé produced the founding CVF declaration, which already called for a 1.5-degree goal, among other key priorities, including financing and means of implementation. But it also included a commitment to low-carbon development and even ambitions for carbon neutrality that were later adopted at the national level by various CVF countries such as Maldives and Costa Rica. Maldives, on behalf of the CVF, pushed for the 1.5-degree goal during the Copenhagen Climate Change Conference in COP15 in the closed leaders' negotiations. The 2013 to 2015 review of the 2-degree goal during ADP 2.9 was agreed upon, providing a crucial pathway to strengthening the goal back to 1.5 degrees Celsius, a decision now facing COP21 in Paris. So I also present Kiribati's achievements. Kiribati, as a second CVF chair, hosted the Tarawa Climate Change Conference at its capital in November 2011, just prior to the Cancun COP16 UN Climate Change Conference, an event including CVF members and representatives from different observer groups, including developed and developing countries, including major emerging countries' economies such as China. At the Kiribati conference, the AMBO Declaration was adopted that aimed to create convergence between the CVF agenda and the priorities of other key groups of countries. It helped to contribute and create momentum for agreement on key decisions from the Copenhagen Summit that required international agreement and greater definition and were ultimately laid out in the Cancun agreements at COP16. The CVF also commissioned and published the first Climate Vulnerability Monitor, also as a part of a new approach to assessing the impact of climate change globally and the varying vulnerability of the world's nations. It was issued in conjunction with COP16 and developed by DARA, the Spain-based International Humanitarian Research Organization, and marked the starting point of the series. Now I call my colleague from Costa Rica to also present its achievements.
Good morning to all of you. I'm sorry. Honorable Assistant Secretary Gary Dominguez, Her Excellency Ambassador Cecilia Ribong, the UN Resident Coordinator Ola Holmgren, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, friends, all of us. Costa Rica is very pleased really to be part of the CVF. And now we are very pleased also to be here with some observer countries. Some observer countries, even from my region, as well as Honduras, Guatemala, Haiti, Dominican Republic, and some others. I think this is a perfect time really to join us, and we are really pleased to work with all the countries now present here. The experience of Costa Rica has been quite positive, and we are very active, participating not only in the meetings of the Climate Change Convention, but also in the CVF. We had the presidency for 2 years, and now we are part of this troika. Our experience of Costa Rica during these 2 years has been quite positive. For instance, talking about the global support project with the UNDP, with the operationalization of the CVF Trust Fund established by Costa Rica and Bangladesh under Bangladesh presidency of CVF in early 2013 was very successful. Costa Rica oversaw the creation of the UNDP using that fund of a global project for CVF support. This project has been designated to provide support for secretariat services, communications, and the organizations of our events, such as the regional activities that has been undertaken this and last year, as well as facilities for the meeting, policy events at the UN, and much more else. I think this trust fund has to be enlarged. I mean, we need more additional resources for this trust fund. The real issue of having this trust fund is to have more financial resources in order to implement, let's say, the roadmap as well as the participation in this kind of meeting for all of us. We need to foster a more active strategy for fundraising for the trust fund. And we are working, and we are very committed to work with this. Concerning the website has been also a very, very important issue here. In the second half of 2013, we oversaw the creation of the CVF public website, which now experiences an average of 20,000 website visits each month. and serves as an important information sharing platform for the CVF. We also established the social media channels of the CVF, which now includes Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and many other platforms of which we increase popularity. I think every single day the CVF is more under the spot of the international community. And this is extremely important and good for us, especially because we need really to be more interactive in participating in the convention. I do apologize because I thought that Honorable Senator Lauren Legarda was leaving the room before my participation, and I can see now her from here. And please, my best regards. I really enjoyed her speech. We also have been actively participation in the Costa Rican Action Plan. And we led the consultation of the activity-based Costa Rica Action Plan that focused the energy of CVF members on important sectors outside of the UNFCCC. The plan built on efforts of CVF members that has been quite successful since many years inside the UN Human Rights Council. And talking about human rights, we think that for Costa Rica has been a fundamental pillar of the foreign policy, human rights, and is very well known for that, as well as for environmental policies taken many, many years ago. And in this sense, Costa Rica has been put forward what is called the Geneva Pledge, to put the human being as the center of this climate change problem we have facing now. Who are the most vulnerable, I think, are us, the human beings. That's why we consider that human rights, the human rights is part of this climate change as well. And then the Geneva Pledge is fostering this. I thank all countries that has been joined Costa Rica in this Geneva Pledge. Also, the action plan applied this same approach to other sectors outside the UNFCCC that are also important. These include, for instance, migration, where CVF advocacy supported the creation of a new division within the Migration Management Department of the International Organization on Migrations, IOM, agreed to in late 2014 at the IOM Council, where the CVF held a prominent policy event. The action plan is also the origin of the idea of the V20, the creation of which it called for. I think the V20 is extremely important, and the V20 has to be considered an integral part of the CVF. Costa Rica was participating from the very beginning in a conversation with the World Bank in Doha, and then we just put forward this idea to the World Bank to gather and to join all the V20, what we call the V20 at the time, but it was the 20 Minister of Finance of the CVF. And then I think it was taken in a very positive way by the World Bank. And this year in Peru, we materialized this idea. And I think it's an extremely important message to the international organizations and the international community, how we, the 20 most vulnerable Minister of Finance of these countries, are together trying to get a new architecture, financial architecture for climate change. We cannot really continue only based on the international cooperation. We have to show to the world that we are able also to organize ourselves in order to get this small architecture for financing climate change in our own countries. I think I will take the words of the Honorable Secretary Lauren Legarda when she said vulnerable but not incapable of action. And I think this is a real action taken by the CVF to put together our Minister of Finance in one tune in order to be part of this global problem we have. Then other sectors covered by the plan include health, labor, and science, meaning by the IPCC. Concerning the regional meetings, Costa Rica also proposed to undertake the series of regional activities, culminating on a global consultation that many of the countries present here today have taken part in this and last year. We hosted the first of these meetings for Central America and the Caribbean in April 2014 in San Jose and Cahuita, a small town in our Caribbean coast. It was a tremendous opportunity also to interact and also to put forward the vulnerabilities of the marine and coastal that we are facing right now. The purpose of these events has been to exchange best practices, to develop ideas and solutions for better responses to climate change, and to improve the representational quality of the work of the CVF. We were thrilled to see this work taken forward under the presidency of the Philippines and to conclude in June this year in Bonn with a global consultation among the share of the 5 regional events, and more than 50 countries took part on this activity. Part of the draft outcome documentation before us at this event is drawn from ideas and lessons that surfaced in these regional activities. We can be very proud to say that this is a tremendous also idea and opportunity to come all together and to be present in all the regions of where we belong to. Concerning this, let me share some intimacies concerning this last comment. It will take just 2 minutes, but I think it's important to share this with you because it could be a lesson for life on how to proceed in order to be effective in our group, the organization of our work, and more important, the effective use of scarce financial resources, because although this series of regional activities were a tremendous success, there is a sad experience behind it. We are all in confidence here. And then I have to tell you that how frustrating it was during the last years of the presidency of the CVF for Costa Rica when we were organizing the ministerial meeting. I am still remember the anger and frustration of Mr. Matthew McKinnon, who has been acting as the secretary of the CVF. When I was the operational responsible of the presidency of Costa Rica in the CVF from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Organizing this meeting, we were quite frustrated, as I mentioned, because it was almost 2 weeks before the meeting, and we never had responses, really, of participation at the high level. So we were concerned about all the resources that we were trying to find and how to convince our Minister of Finance of Costa Rica in order to put forward the financial resources to get this meeting in Costa Rica. We finally succeed, and then we allocated the financial resources for that. But not having any response, real responses of participation, we decided to cancel the meeting. And it was the origin of this regional, the regional activities we had been putting forward here. Because how can be more effective? How can we use the financial resources we have in the trust fund and the national financial resources that we are using in order to organize these kind of meetings. I mean, I think it was a tremendous good idea to have, instead of one meeting at ministerial level in our countries each year or each 2 years, is to have these regional meetings in all the regions where we belong to. So the sharing of information, the sharing of experiences is tremendous. And that's why I am saying that behind this tremendous success, it was a quite sad experience. But well, learning from errors, I think we are now in the path to make the necessary corrections, and I think this is the way that we have to continue interacting. I think, as I mentioned, the participation of Costa Rica in the CVF is very committed. We are very, very willing to continue working with all of you. Costa Rica is a country that can share with you a lot of good practices, good experiences, and knowledge. And I think the only thing is just to find the ways to how to interact among us in a horizontal way in this, what we call the South-South cooperation, let's say. Why we don't try to also find ways and means of fostering triangular cooperation with some donor countries and be more effective. Well, I wish to all of you a very good meeting as well. We are open to interact with all of you, and I welcome all the observers and participants in this event. Thank you very much indeed, and I thank also the authorities of Philippines to organize this, for organizing this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Carmona. At this point, our next speaker represents Bangladesh, the forum's third chair. Ladies and gentlemen, Director Shanchita Hakwe of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Bangladesh.
Honorable Assistant Secretary, all respected members of the Government of Philippines, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. I'm very happy, me and my colleague from Bangladesh, we are very happy to be present here in this beautiful city, Manila. And you know, Bangladesh is an active member in any climate change negotiation or in any forum where climate change is dealt. The reason, as you all know, who are representing the most vulnerable countries here, that it's an existential threat for us, and this is something which is relating to our existence. And that's why we take this climate change issues very seriously. In line with that, Bangladesh became a partner, committed member of the CVF from its very initiation. And we were one of the founding members of this group, and we took our presidency very seriously. Now, I would like to share some of the events or some of the important milestones that happened during the presidency of Bangladesh. Bangladesh took over presidency of CVF in November 2011, and it remained its president as till July 2013. A ministerial meeting was held in Dhaka in the presence of our Prime Minister and also in the presence of United Nations Secretary General. We took this presidency. This was the first event the first ministerial meeting where the membership of this CVF was expanded from its member 11 to it increased to 20. And it also brought out a 14-point Dhaka Declaration, which provided very critical inputs to COP17, which was held in Durban. And this was the COP event which established the current ADP negotiation track. And I'm also happy to tell you that the linkages between LDCs and AOCs and Africa was created at that time. And this is very important in securing our interests in the ADP negotiations. Ladies and gentlemen, Dhaka Declaration also called for, among others, dialogues on people displaced as a result of severe climate change impacts. And you know, just last month, there was Nansen Initiative's protection agenda came out, and Bangladesh endorsed this. So this shows our commitment to climate change issues. Dhaka Declaration also reiterated the call for 1.5 degree temperature goal, and we will continue to do so in the CVF group and also in the negotiation which is now going on for Paris legally binding agreement. We would continue to do so. And also, this, during the Dhaka ministerial meeting, it mandated the second edition of Climate Vulnerability Monitor, and which was launched by our Honorable Prime Minister in a sideline event in 2012 UN General Assembly. We also reiterated the need for clarity on operational modalities of CVF during our presidency. In 2012, Bangladesh led the consultation process and external engagement with the UN to establish the CVF Trust Fund. And in fact, in 2012, our Prime Minister announced Bangladesh's contribution, a very humble contribution, which was $100,000 to the fund to operationalize this instrument. And during this time, 4 agencies have signed MOU with CVF Fund. Those 4 agencies were IOM, UNISDR, UNDP, and WMO. Bangladesh also led the dialogue missions of the CVF to the US government and the World Bank in October 2012, along with the other Troika members. And you know, this led to the setup of V20, which came out last month. And we feel that this was a very important progression in our journey as a CVF group. Bangladesh also hosted a number of public side events reinforcing the focus on climate vulnerability and major intergovernmental events like Rio 20, COP17, and COP18. Having said these things, I would just like to share with you that Bangladesh remains very committed to Paris Paris Agreement negotiation, and although we know that CVF is not a negotiation group in the ADP negotiations, but we feel and we believe that as a group we can strengthen our voice and we can work collectively and very strongly to secure our agenda in the Paris negotiation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Director Hake. And to share with us the CVF accomplishments on behalf of the Philippines, once again, let us welcome Assistant Secretary Jesus Domingo. Sir?
Okay, thank you, Arnold. Just a little note. What you've been served this morning for your mid-morning, your morning snack is sort of our, well, if France has its croissant and pain au chocolat, we have ensaimada, which is, as you see, a bread-based pastry. And the middle, the inside, is our national sweet condiment called ube, which is a purple yam jam. Okay. Well, the Philippines took over the presidency of the CVF from Costa Rica in January 2015, and our presidency was announced at COP20 held in Lima, Peru, and our presidency will be until mid-2016. The regional meetings continued under the Philippine presidency. The Philippines hosted the CVF Regional Workshop in Asia, an event that gathered representatives from 12 countries across Asia to identify the most important risks, solutions, and needs of vulnerable countries in the region in the context of the new post-2015 international climate change regime. During the Asia Regional Workshop, the initial outline of the South-South Center of Excellence on Climate Information and Services was prepared. The center aims to facilitate collaboration on climate information and services by key actors in the country and globally through the CVF by providing a venue of knowledge exchange and learning among countries vulnerable to climate change. The project outline was submitted and favorably received by the German Federal Ministry for the Environment International Climate Initiative. The full proposal will be submitted early next year. The forum contributes to the INFCCC 2013 to 2015 review of the internationally agreed 2 centigrade temperature limit, including new expert reports on human rights, labor, migration, and displacement, while calling for strengthening the goal to 1.5 degrees centigrade. The CVF established the Vulnerable 20 Group of Ministers of Finance, or the V20, from 7 to 8 October 2015 in Lima, Peru, in conjunction with the annual meetings of the World Bank Group and IMF. The V20 is a dedicated cooperation platform among ministers of finance of the CVF, enabling vulnerable countries to steer a high-level policy dialogue pertaining to action on climate change and the promotion of climate-resilient and low-emission development. During the meeting, it was agreed upon to study the creation of a sovereign V20 climate risk pooling mechanism to distribute economic and financial risks, to improve recovery after climate-induced extreme weather events and disasters, and to enhance security of jobs, livelihoods, businesses, and investors. The CVF and CARE International have launched a new online campaign, hashtag 1.5 degrees, campaign to strengthen the 2-degree goal, to gather more support for the call to keep warming below 1.5 degrees. The campaign kickoff took place at the sidelines of the UNFCCC negotiations in Bonn in the last preparatory meeting before COP21 to be held in Paris this December. This Sherpa senior officials meeting, now being held in Manila, is a third full meeting of the CVF since its establishment in 2009. The meeting offers the prospect of making a new contribution to shaping critical climate change policy decisions, as well as articulating shared interests in light of COP21. There will be a discussion, a detailed discussion, on a CVF declaration and a roadmap for the 2016 to 2018 period, reaffirming and recalibrating priorities further to the Costa Rica CVF Action Plan of 2013 to 2015. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ASEC Domingo. So again, a round of applause to our first set of speakers. Thank you. So today we are also honored to have with us observers from our dear partners. Today they will also give their opening statements.
So may we call on to join us on stage Mr. Laurent Legodec, Deputy Head of Mission of the Embassy of the French Republic to the Philippines, Mr. Michael Hasper, Deputy Head of Mission, Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany, Mr. Ola Almgren, UN Resident Coordinator, Philippines, Mr. Renato Redentor Constantino, Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, and last but not the least, Mr. Gio Tingson, National Youth Commission, Philippines.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. So to give his first opening statement, ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Mr. Laurent Legodec, the Deputy Head of Mission, Embassy of the French Republic. Sir?
Good morning, everyone. Honorable Senator Legarda, Commissioner Alvarez, Excellencies, distinguished guests, it is a great pleasure for me to be with you all today, this morning, for the opening of the last meeting of the CVF before the opening of COP21 in Paris at the end of the month. Um, Today, experts have identified that more than 70 countries are vulnerable to the effects of climate change, directly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So, of course, your countries are among those and maybe are among the most vulnerable to effects of climate change. But somehow, every country can be considered as vulnerable today to the effects of climate change. And we have seen that these countries are facing particularly destructive climate events such as typhoons, rainfall, sandstorms, and now we are commemorating the second anniversary of Typhoon Yolanda, Super Typhoon Yolanda, that hit the Philippines in November 2013. So of course, when we have that in mind, and when we remember all the lives that have been lost because of the effects of climate change, we feel the need to act and to gather to find ways to fight climate change. And this is in this spirit that we are preparing COP21. This is in this spirit that France has been preparing it for almost 1 year now. So this is not a question of developed nations opposing developing nations. Definitely it's not that. Thankfully, we are not there anymore. This approach has led us to failure in the past. And France has tried to be very inclusive in the preparation of COP21, and the French presidency of COP21 will be very inclusive as well, so that to try to ensure that we get an ambitious, legally binding and universal agreement in Paris in December that would be hopefully, that would allow us hopefully to limit the global warming consequences to a maximum of 2 degrees Celsius. So of course, we understand that the vulnerable countries have this target of 1.5, but we have also to take into consideration every stakeholder's interest and views. And if we manage, we think the French presidency of COP21 will have this goal that if we manage to have an agreement on the limitation of a 2 degrees Celsius rise, it will be a good agreement in itself as a first step in any case. And I may say as well that if we want to limit the global warming, maybe we should as well try to lower the use of aircon, and I think that everyone would agree on that here today because it's really cold here. Having said that, and having talked to you about the spirit that we have for the preparation of COP21, I could sum it up with one word, and this word is solidarity. Because we have understood that if we want to be efficient in our fight against climate change, we must fight together, and then we must show solidarity. And this is why the French presidency of the COP really value your work and the voice of the vulnerable countries in the preparation of this conference. Because what the most vulnerable countries have to say about the effects, the concrete effects of climate change, can help us secure this ambitious deal that I was talking about. France itself also knows from experience how fragile we are when faced with natural disasters. We were able to learn from these disasters that have affected us either in our metropolitan territory or in our overseas territories. So we are ready to share these learnings to help the most vulnerable countries to adapt to climate risk. This is what we are trying to do every day on a bilateral basis as well. But in the preparation of COP21, we, with the Secretary General of the United Nations, we have one goal, which is to establish a Paris Alliance for the climate that will be based on 4 pillars. First, it is this universal agreement that I was talking about to limit the global warming rise to a maximum of 2 degrees Celsius. Second, we will carefully monitor the implementation of national contributions. And third, we hope that the Paris Alliance will provide financial support and a guarantee of fairness for an effective agreement. And finally, we hope to set up an agenda of solutions to bring together all stakeholders, communities, regions, businesses, and civil society to take concrete action on the ground together with national governments. And because for facing a threat as destabilizing as climate change, we must give concrete answers to our people to save lives. So in this perspective, France hopes that the Paris Conference on the Climate will also be a platform for action in the future years to come. To secure an agreement is one thing, but to have it being implemented is another thing. And somehow it's an even more daunting task that faces us beyond COP21. But the first step, of course, will be to succeed in COP21. And this is why we need everybody on board. And this is why we really value every contribution. And once again, we really value the CVF's contribution. So I wish all of you a very fruitful meeting today and tomorrow. And we are looking forward to your Manila Paris Declaration content and to the roadmap that you will adopt at the end of your works. So thanks again for being here today and for listening to me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Legodec. At this point, we will be having the statement from the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany, the Deputy Head of Mission, Mr. Michael Hasper.
Honorable Senator Loren Legarda, members of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Climate change is an imminent threat to the global community and the most important challenge of the century, maybe of mankind. The most vulnerable countries gathered in the Climate Vulnerable Forum will be the most affected. The United Nations Climate Change Conference in Paris, or COP21, commencing on the 30th of November 2015, will be of key importance to set the stage for the future climate agreement to keep global warming under a critical threshold in order to avoid devastating effects for the planet and mankind. Germany stands firm with its commitment to support an ambitious climate agreement that will include global action on mitigation and adaptation to climate change and avoiding climate-induced disasters. Germany, as a member of the European Union, has committed its mitigation action in its intended nationally determined contributions, INDC, with substantial reduction of its greenhouse gases and also investment in adaptation to climate change impacts. The German government supports international initiatives to meet our climate goals. Therefore, Germany has committed substantial funding to the Green Climate Fund and additionally through Germany's International Climate Initiative, based on a decision of the German Parliament already in 2008. The Philippines and other vulnerable countries are already being supported through projects funded by Germany's International Climate Initiative. Germany welcomes the initiative of the Climate Vulnerable Forum, gathering vulnerable countries across regions in preparing its critical inputs into the COP21 in Paris. We are glad to support this initiative from the side of the German government, and we do hope that this Sherpa meeting will provide its important contribution to make COP21 a success that will ensure the world's future with an ambitious and legally binding climate agreement that will be decided and implemented jointly by all nations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Michael Hasper. At this point, we will hear from the UN Resident Coordinator in the Philippines. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Ola Almgren. Sir?
Thank you very much. Distinguished officials of the government of the Philippines, led by the Climate Change Commission and, of course, the Department of Foreign Affairs. Distinguished representatives of the member countries of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. Distinguished representatives of the Manila Diplomatic Corps. Our friends from civil society. Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I would like to start just with recognizing the welcoming statement by the Honorable Senator Legarda, which I think really raised the bar of expectations on this meeting. I would also like to, of course, at the very outset, extend my warmest welcome to our CVF Sherpas on behalf of the United Nations family here in the Philippines. These are very exciting times with a number of climate change and disaster reduction related meetings going on almost simultaneously in the Philippines this week. A prelude to an even more exciting meeting in Paris at the end of the month, which will of course extend well into the second week of December. This meeting here today and the coming 2 days in particular has the opportunity to become considered historic, as its results will feed into what may be a redefinition of life and development as we know it on this planet. With the recent launch of the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, we are on the threshold of transforming from what has been a traditional development pathway to one which will not only be sensitive to the environment, but ensure improved living conditions in the present while preserving resources for future generations. That is why we commend the CVF countries, now chaired by the Philippines, for coming together to send an unequivocal message to the rest of the world, to take the necessary collective action in effecting urgent climate action. If the spate of recent climate-related disaster events are any indication, we do not have much time to maneuver out of the bind that we have put ourselves in with regard to climate change and the impact thereof. The CVS is in a very strategic position to articulate what should urgently be done, being already in the direct path of the unfolding adverse impacts of climate change. For example, your advocacy for a lower threshold of below 1.5 degrees Celsius bravely connotes that 2 degrees is not good enough. We need ambition in setting for ourselves the starting point from which we will, as a collective, systematically reduce greenhouse gas emissions until global atmospheric temperature is stabilized to a safe level. A silver lining, perhaps, to a gloomy climate prognosis is that there is still time, if limited, to act. We can still take the opportunity not only to halt environmental degradation and its dire consequences, but change the development pathway towards a more sustainable, cleaner, and more productive trajectory beneficial to the overall well-being of humankind and of our planet. But it will require genuine cooperation and sharing, enabling the poorest and most vulnerable countries to leapfrog into a cleaner and more productive future. It means enabling access to mitigation and adaptation technologies and know-how, and developed and developing countries joining forces to innovate more rapidly. It also means a just and equitable sharing in the results, particularly, of course, the benefits. Overall, the way forward will require deliberate and careful orchestration from determining what needs to be done to actually doing it. And this is where I believe the United Nations comes in. As a normative organization, the UN has to articulate norms and standards in addressing issues affecting the global community like climate change. And the UN is also a powerful catalyst and convener which can enable crafting and implementation of solutions faster and more lasting. This is why we at the United Nations Development Programme do our utmost to support mechanisms like the Climate Vulnerability Forum, which may not be a formal aggregation by the UNFCCC standards, but can and is already be an effective advocate platform and a working mechanism which can formulate and showcase solutions to address the climate change problem. On behalf of the UN, I would therefore like to strongly encourage you to continue to be bold, bolder even, because we certainly need boldness, resolve, and imagination to overcome this gigantic problem called climate change. As you grapple with the complex task of determining what needs to go into the CVF Manila Paris Declaration, be comforted by the fact that your United Nations supports your aspirations fully and stands ready to help you implement operational aspects of such an instrument. I'm probably not overemphasizing the fact that the vulnerable peoples of the world are eagerly awaiting what CVF has to say and demand. And on their behalf, I sincerely wish you a very fruitful and successful meeting. Thank you, and as we always say here in the Philippines, mabuhay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Almgren. And last but not the least, from the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities and also the non-government organization representative to the Philippines People Survival Fund, we have with us Mr. Renato Redentor Constantino.
Thank you, Pebbles. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good day, everyone. To the heads of mission, deputy heads of mission, charge d'affaires, all the senior officers present here from the CVF member countries, and colleagues in civil society. I come from civil society, and my badge contains the most interesting description. It says observer, and it's an interesting tag because while my colleagues and we are in the business of observing a lot of things very closely, we are very far from aloof. We are part of a wide and growing movement. And we do more than watch. Many of us are fully engaged, and sometimes we can be very critical. But many, if not most, of our organizations also hold a very high particular belief. In fact, today, in the midst of the most serious challenge that faces the world's poor, we have elevated this belief into principle. Government cannot and should not have to face the climate crisis on its own. The magnitude of the crisis confronting all of us compels civil society to rise above the narrow definition of non-state actors, to rise above the ultra-narrow label of protesters. Never has the need to speak out become more important than today. And yet we know that the climate crisis demands of us too that we help catalyze action. This is the reason why my organization, along with others, helped write and pass the People Survival Fund Law, which established the first legislated climate finance mechanism in the Philippines, dedicated to supporting the adaptation action of local governments. This is the reason why, right away, we responded to the call for support of our government in COP20 in Lima, in Peru, when the Philippines assumed the chair of the CVF. From the background, below the radar of media, we have tried to do what we can to help our government achieve its goal, which is to elevate the climate change discourse. For instance, we work closely with the delegates of San Lucia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Bangladesh in Bonn last June to protect the 1.5 degrees target against countries that would rather see it dissolve into dust. And back again in Lima last October, we worked closely with good people from the finance ministries of close to 24 vulnerable countries to launch in an absolutely jam-packed hall, the V20 group of finance ministers, who are each dedicated to the goal of mobilizing resources in tandem with action to address a crisis whose ultimate resolution is still within reach. Then there was the launch of the website that showed to the world the number of countries supporting the 1.5 degrees goal. The voice of the vulnerable today rises above the cynical politics held by countries historically responsible for climate change, as well as emerging economies who believe themselves to be their equals, if not betters, but who, it seems, merely excel in pursuing at a faster pace the same polluting pathways. But the CVF seems to be different. Far from the blame game, CVF member countries know that the ultimate yardstick is the ability of the vulnerable to do more than just cope, but to transform society as well. As a member of civil society, our goal is to highlight how CVF members have acted alongside the CVF's demand for others to act with a greater sense of urgency and responsibility. For instance, from its submitted INDC, we know the Philippines set for itself the goal of contributing its fair share in global climate action by delivering up to 70% of its emissions reductions, which many hope will allow the country to slide into decarbonization. We are aware of Ethiopia's ambition. Despite its status as a least developed country with low historic responsibility and capability, it submitted an INDC that is more ambitious than most effort-sharing approaches would suggest. Look at Morocco, which intends to reduce its emissions by 32% below business as usual by 2030. It proposes, if financial support is provided, to stop its emissions growth and implement an ambitious target of 42% renewable electricity generation by 2020. Look at Costa Rica, which aims to become carbon neutral by 2021 and intends to reduce its fossil fuel emissions and increase its carbon sinks to reach net zero total emissions without using offsets in other countries. In Bangladesh, at last count, the country has installed over 3.8 million solar home systems since 2003. This benefits over 13 million people, and the country is looking to finance 6 million more of the same systems by 2017. Ladies and gentlemen, you hold a powerful voice as the CVF. Individually, we are small. Together, we are bigger and we are more powerful. You hold a voice that can demand greater action from others by expecting from yourselves the pursuit of the same goal. Action that adapts to our changing world, but which also seeks efforts to act faster than the changing climate by spurring nothing less than the transformation of our economies. As you work at the objectives of this conference over the next 2 days, we ask you to consider 3 things. First, convey the readiness to act so others can take greater action. The total INDCs thus far submitted is both gratifying and also worrisome. The process shows what we have so far achieved and that it is working. But it is also clear that we remain far from the goal. In light of current INDC emission commitments amounting to approximately 3 degrees warming, as vulnerable countries, we must strengthen our own national climate actions in order to lead processes that can help trigger increased commitments from all countries, leading towards our goal, the CVF goal of 1.5 degrees, while asserting that additional enabling support on means of implementation is indispensable to more robust mitigation action by CVF countries. Number 2, we must insist that adaptation needs are inseparable from the long-term goal. The 3 degrees of warming that we might reach if current commitments are not improved will require far more serious adaptation efforts compared with our current needs. Holding the rise in temperatures below 1.5 will reduce adaptation costs significantly, even if even if major additional efforts are already required simply to manage impacts associated with the current rates of warming. Third, work with civil society. Together, we can do more things, and we can do more things effectively and faster together. You should not have to, and you need not have to, tackle the climate crisis on your own. There is a saying from the Nigerian novelist Chinua Achebe that comes to mind. Age, said Achebe, age was respected among the people, but achievement was revered. As the elder said, if a child washed his hands, he could eat with kings. Unquote. Although the influence of powerful countries today is respected in global politics, the truth is it is achievement that is revered. Because if we act as we should today, we can do more than just eat with kings. We might eat with happiness as well, with our children and our grandchildren. I certainly hope you agree that this is a quantifiably wonderful and reachable goal. So let us be ambitious together so that we can give the gift of ambition to others too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sir Red Constantino. Distinguished guests, at this point, we would like to hear from the chair of the CVF Troika Expert Advisors Group. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Dr. Salimul Huk from the International Center for Climate Change and Development. Sir?
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Salimul Haq. I'm a director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development at the Independent University in Bangladesh, where I'm from. I also happen to be a lead author of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on Vulnerability and Adaptation. And in the context of the UNFCCC, I'm an advisor to the least developed countries, group of countries in the negotiations. But I'm here now in my capacity as chair of the expert advisors group of the CVF, along with my fellow experts at the table over there, representing them. And it's my pleasure, and I'd like to thank the CVS for having invited us to this meeting and to provide our expertise. I'm also very pleased to have been associated with the CVF from the very beginning. I was invited by President Nasheed to the first meeting in Male and invited to speak to that meeting. I was also present at the meeting in Bangladesh that you heard about, and most recently in Lima, when the handing over from Costa Rica to Philippines was done, I was chairing that session as well. So I've had a long association with the CVF, and I'm a great supporter of the CVF personally as well. I'm going to make 3 remarks with regard to what we as our expert advisors would bring up for your attention and reiterate a little bit some of the things that have already been said. The first one is to discuss a little bit more in depth this target of 1.5 degrees. As you heard, President Nasheed, who originated the Climate Vulnerable Forum, then went to Copenhagen, and he was in the heads of state meeting at the very end, defending the 1.5 degree target as much as he could, but in the end he couldn't. So the world adopted a 2 degree target, but what he did manage to do and include in the last paragraph of the Copenhagen Agreement was something called a review of the long-term target between 2013 and 2015. And unbeknownst to many of you, I would imagine none of you know about this, there has been a review. It has been called the Structured Expert Dialogue on the long-term goal. And they reviewed it. They had meetings, experts met during 2013 to 2015, and they produced a report last June of this year, when we had a session in Bonn. And I'll summarize the report. I recommend that you have a look at the report if you can. It's on the UNFCCC website. It's called the Structured Expert Dialogue on the Long-Term Goal. As UNFCCC, we always have very long, complicated names for everything. And it says the following. It says that while 2 degrees as a long-term goal is safe for many countries and many people, it is not safe for all countries and all people. And so if we want all countries and all people to be safe, we need a 1.5 degree goal. And the reason for pushing the 1.5 degree goal is not whether it's feasible or possible, we know it's going to be difficult, but whether it's morally correct or not. And our argument is that a global leadership meeting in Paris that adopts a 2 degree goal will knowingly be writing off many people, and many of those people are from the countries represented here, and saying to them, we cannot protect you because it's too difficult for us to make the emission cuts that are necessary to protect you, the most vulnerable people on planet Earth. And that's a bad decision for the world leaders to be making. And that is really the moral case of the Climate Vulnerable Forum. The number one thing that the Climate Vulnerable Forum can do is raise that moral case of 1.5 degrees is the right goal to have. Even if it's difficult, even if it may not even be achievable, it's the right goal to have. It is what we should, as leaders, agree to in Paris, and I hope that you will continue to push that. My second message is the role of the Climate Vulnerable Forum in the context of the Framework Convention on Climate Change. Many of the countries that are represented here in the forum actually belong to different groups in the negotiations. There's the least developed countries group that some of you belong to, there's the Africa group that some of you belong to, there's the Alliance of Small Island States that some of you belong to, and some of you belong to neither of these 3 groups, but to other groups. In the UNFCCC process, one of the things that is happening, particularly I speak for the least developed countries group, which I am associated with, is there a little bit of a confusion about the Climate Vulnerable Forum. Is this a new negotiating group, or what is it? And I would ask that you clarify, and particularly in the statement that you're preparing, the Manila Paris statement, you clarify for these countries and these groups that this is not a new negotiating group. You're not bypassing the existing negotiating groups, but you're elevating some of the messages that are common messages. And as I said, 1.5 degrees is a common message of the vulnerable countries, not G77 in China. They have not adopted it. There are countries in G77 China who oppose 1.5 degrees. So it's a vulnerable countries issue, but it's a collective issue of the vulnerable countries. And that you are not renegotiating or opening up new negotiating channels, bypassing the existing negotiating groups that I mentioned, LDCs, AOSIS, and Africa in particular. And I hope that you will be able to do that in your declaration. And the third and final point I'll make is again to pick up on messages that you've already heard from previous speakers, in particular from Honorable Senator Lauren Legarda, which is that the reason for the CVF forum to come together, the vulnerable countries to come together 6 years ago when President Nasheed convened the first meeting, was the problem of vulnerability, the problem of climate change, and the common vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. But going forward, that cannot be the only reason for coming together. We have to go from the problem to the solution of the problem. And that's where the Climate Vulnerable Forum, as we just heard from Red Constantino, has an opportunity to show leadership to the rest of the world in terms of tackling climate change, both in terms of the impacts of climate change through adaptation and also through mitigation. As we just heard, a number of countries are taking the lead. And I can inform you that Bangladesh has actually gone beyond 4 million. As of last week, we went through more than 4 million solar home systems in Bangladesh, which is the fastest growing solar home system program in the world. And so we can not only do things together, we can lead the world in doing those things. And I will leave you with the thought of how do we go forward. Let me just add one other thing for your consideration, which is that no matter what we do in Paris, and even if we get the best agreement in Paris, it actually does not make any difference for the next 20, 30 years. It makes a difference for the long term in terms of where we're headed. But the next 20, 30 years worth of climate change, your lifetime, my lifetime, is locked in. It's going to happen. We're going to have to deal with it. No amount of agreements, good or bad, in Paris are going to make any difference. It's how we deal with that problem that's going to matter. And so the reality of dealing with climate change now needs to be the substance of the CVF going forward, and I would endorse the view that has been put forward by Honorable Senator Lauren Lagarde already, which is we need to think beyond a couple of years, we need to think into the future in terms of 5 to 10 years, and how we can collectively learn from each other. And I'll end by saying specifically what we might be able to do. We are in the Philippines, which we know is a very vulnerable country to the impacts of typhoons, but at the same time, very well adapted to normal typhoons. When we have a super typhoon, we're talking about something that goes beyond adaptation into the realm of loss and damage, which is another area of contention in the UNFCCC. But we know that the Philippines is well adapted, and we can all learn from the Philippines on how to adapt to the impacts of climate change and share our knowledge with them. Similarly, my country, Bangladesh, is well ahead of the game in working with vulnerable communities. We do a lot of work on community-based adaptation with vulnerable communities, and we'll be, in fact, hosting the next big international conference on community-based adaptation, hosted by the government of Bangladesh, organized by my center in Bangladesh, in April of next year, where we expect several hundred people from all over the world to come and share their knowledge. So not only are the vulnerable countries vulnerable, they're actually now leading in some areas the rest of the world in terms of how to tackle the problem of climate change. And I think one of the big agenda items that you should be thinking about over the next day and a half that we have here is how we can move forward in terms of the cooperation that we can do in terms of learning from each other. And the recent creation of the V20 finance ministers is a very good sign. Hopefully the finance ministers will be able to put some of their own finance into supporting this mutual cooperation program, for which we do not need to look for the rest of the world or donor countries to give us money. We have enough capability, we have enough resources to do some things ourselves. Obviously we can expand if we get additional assistance, but we should not wait for assistance for us to take the issue forward. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hook. And of course, our dear speakers, Mr. Lagodec, Mr. Hasper, Mr. Almgren, and Mr. Constantino. You may now make yourselves comfortable. And we will now proceed to our first plenary session, where we will have the first presentation of the tabled draft text of the Manila-Paris Declaration by Director Donna Gatmaytan of the Department of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines. Please welcome Director Gatmaytan.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, at the onset, allow me to first acknowledge the presence of our senior officials from the Climate Vulnerable Forum's member countries for this Sherpa Senior Officials meeting. They are from the countries of Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Costa Rica, Ethiopia, Ghana, Kenya, Kiribati, Madagascar, Nepal, St. Lucia, Tanzania, Vanuatu, and Vietnam. We wish to acknowledge also the delegates from the following observer countries: Burkina Faso, Cambodia, Comoros, Dominican Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Fiji, Grenada, Guatemala, Haiti, Honduras, Malawi, Mongolia, Morocco, Myanmar, Niger, Palau, Papua New Guinea, Senegal, South Sudan, Sri Lanka, Sudan, Tajikistan, Tunisia, and Yemen. Welcomes to all of you. Let me now present an overview of the draft Manila-Paris Declaration. The draft document that we have today is informed by various research and regional consultations organized by the Climate Vulnerable Forum in the past year. It incorporates inputs from climate vulnerable forum members, observers, and designated regional experts gathered during the last 2 months since the Zero Draft was circulated in Bonn, Germany last September 2015 at the meeting of the Ad Hoc Working Group on the Durban Platform for Enhanced Action 2.10. We wish to thank the CVF members and Troika Expert Advisors Group for their submissions. Our collective task currently, together with partners and stakeholders, is to lend a consultative review of the declaration that will be integrated into the Manila Sherpa Senior Officials Meeting outcome documents. This Sherpa meeting, participated by esteemed delegates, presents a very important opportunity to converge on critical climate issues that will become the Climate Vulnerable Forum's positions that will be brought to the global platforms in Paris towards the end of this year. It is foreseen that the draft declaration and accompanying outcome documents to be discussed in the Sherpa meeting will be carried forward for confirmation by the heads of delegations of the Climate Vulnerable Forum at a meeting of the CVF planned in conjunction with the high-level segment of the United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP21, in Paris on November 30, 2015. The draft Manila Paris Declaration has the following parts. The preamble, which outlines the perspectives and aspirations of vulnerable countries on the critical issues on the agenda of the climate negotiations. Commitments in advancing transformed climate finance and enhancing South-South cooperation to build capacities and share expertise and technologies to enable the most vulnerable countries to respond to climate challenges. Appeal for international cooperation to support new approaches of collaborative climate action and for strengthening work on loss and damage. Priorities for action informed by common long-term goals to be realized through access to financing and balanced allocation for mitigation and adaptation, improving climate governance, enabling the private sector, boosting local research capacities, raising awareness of civil society, and maintaining climate change actions in development planning processes. The draft also highlights our continuing commitment to pursue climate action in the focus sectors on human rights, labor, health, migration, and science. The concluding sections of the declaration will refer to forum arrangements on the roadmap, membership, presidency, resourcing, and partnership. In the next couple of hours, the participants will have a chance to review the current draft declaration. There will be 2 simultaneous group discussions after lunch. Group 1 will consist of country delegates, members and observers, Troika and Expert Advisors Group, who will do a line-by-line review of the draft text. For Group 1, the participants should elect a rapporteur who will present the result of discussions to the plenary. The participants should also select 1 country representative per region. For the regions of Africa, particularly Sub-Saharan Africa, Asia, Pacific, Caribbean and Latin America, and Middle East and Northern Africa. For Group 2, it will consist of non-country delegates, partners, non-government organizations, and other stakeholder groups to develop recommendations to the draft declaration. At 3:30 p.m., there will be a plenary to report on the structured discussion by the country delegates and the recommendations from the non-country delegates. The outputs from the plenary will be considered for inclusion in the final declaration through a closed session. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Gatmaytan. Now, before we break for lunch, may we invite you to refer to your program, to the program, as we are to resume with the parallel sessions at 1:30 p.m. So please be advised that for Group 1, you will be occupying this hall, the front part of this hall, and then for Group 2, you will be using the other half of this plenary hall, which is at the back portion.
And again, few more points. We encourage a collegial atmosphere during discussions where members, observers are encouraged to comment equally. And you are supplied with version 2 of the draft outcome documents, which incorporate 2 rounds of comments and some reactive suggestions for changes proposed by the chairs in relation to recent developments and comments received. Also, changes that meet with no hesitation or opposition will be tracked into version 3. More complex issues or proposals will be deferred to the focus groups with the Troika expert advisors and nominees from the 5 different regions.
In terms of the selection of regional nominees, following the structure of the regional meetings, Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Central America and Caribbean, Middle East and North Africa, and the Pacific, 1 member should be chosen from among your regional colleagues per region. For Middle East and North Africa, which does not yet have a member, the nominee will be an observer country. The focus group will then report back to the plenary so that all countries can have a say on the semi-final version of the documents coming from the discussions of the focus group. And the same process applies to the declaration and the roadmap group discussions.